Introduction. Thanks, Jeremy. So it is a real pleasure today to welcome everyone for the Distinguished Lecturer Series of the Hellenic Diaspora Academic Association. For those of you that do not know the association or the series, this series and more generally the activities of the association are supported and made possible through the generous funding by the Niarchos Foundation and also by the Fulbright Foundation. We're grateful for their ongoing support. For those of you not familiar with the Hellenic Diaspora Academic Association, its purpose is to forge a link between different Hellenic and more generally Phil-Hellenic investigators and institutions abroad and in Greece, whose purpose is to foster research collaborations, but also to mentor and educate junior scientists and to help bring state-of-the-art technologies and collaborations to Greece, actually, eventually. I know mentoring is near and dear to Georgia's heart, so I just want to say that is one of the major purposes of the association. Today we have the great pleasure, for me in particular, it's a great pleasure to see Georgia Perakis give a talk today. She's the William Pounds Professor of Management and a Professor of Operations Research at MIT in the Sloan School of Management, where she has been faculty since 1998. She has received numerous awards for her research in analytics optimization using machine learning techniques and other applications in doing research on pricing, revenue management in multiple areas in business as well as in healthcare. One particular it is a particular pleasure that an honor to have her here, because one of her main, apart from her research, which is stellar, one of her main focuses over the years is mentoring. She has mentored multiple young scientists, has gotten multiple prizes, including the Jamieson Prize in 2014 for excellence in teaching at MIT and the Teacher of the Year award among all the faculty of Sloan School in 2017. She is particularly interested on solving problems in pricing, as I said, and she has widely published in many journals that are high profile in her field, including operations research, management science, mathematics of operations research, etc., etc. I think I know Georgia for many years, and I just have to say I am truly honored to be considered a friend of hers, as I count her among not just one of the stellar scientists of our era and of the Greek American community in particular, but as one of the most beautiful people that I've ever known, and is the truly golden heart, and to go together with her academic excellence. It's a rare combination. Without further ado, Georgia, thank you very much for agreeing to join us here, and we're really looking forward to your talk.
Of course. First, I would say definitely likewise. I know Stelios since very low digit numbers. I think we have pictures together when I'm 1 year old, and his brother Yanis, who is also here, and of course Maria. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And I know that it might not be the best time, especially for those who are in Greece, given that it's especially in Crete. I see a lot of AKIS names. But thank you again for inviting me. So let me share my screen. Oh, actually, I have shared it, so we should be good. And, as I was thinking, what should I talk about today? I thought I would talk a little bit about analytics and a little bit how it connects and how it relates to machine learning, And I'll use as an example the work that several members of my group did for a long time regarding COVID-19. And I also wanted to take this chance in this picture that you see here to show you MIT, the dome with a foliage, which is right now, which is famous in the area of New England. And you can see the beautiful colors of the leaves on the ground. So as Telio said, for me, it all started in the island of Crete. And in particular, from my father's side in Elunda, hence you see my background from Agios Nikolos, and from my mother's side, from Lassithi, and also the village of Kounavos. I was born from Heraklion, so Chronia Pola for those that come from Heraklion, since today is the city's main saint, Agios Minas, that's celebrating. And I couldn't help but show two important pictures. Liondaria, if you ever go there, make sure to visit Liondaria and have the famous cheese pie, which I'm not sure how to say it in English. So several years ago, I decided that what is important for me is to have an impact in practice and bring together the academic research to influence practice. That's why my work actually is usually done in collaboration with entities. And as Telio said, my work is in the space of retail and healthcare. So I work with with doctors from these two hospitals, but also in the retail space with a well-known retailer, Zara, with the Oracle Retail Science Group, Liberty Mutual, General Motors. But the reason why I wanted to show this slide, because I think it also connects with Greece, is to talk about an effort at MIT and the newly formed Schwarzman College of Computing, where I now serve as Associate Dean. And what the college is trying to do is, instead of looking at departments siloed, it's kind of trying to do a more horizontal connection between what people do. And that's why you see somebody like me to be working hand in hand with everybody else in computer science, electrical engineering, but also the shared hires that they are doing, which basically is having people being hired in multiple departments, 2 departments in this case. So they are at the college, but they are also in a home department. And they're doing the same in teaching. They have what is called the common ground, which again is trying to connect and make courses that will be relevant to multiple departments together. So both in terms of research and in terms of education, this is the effort. And I think that a lot of other universities will follow and think horizontally instead of vertically. That is the current system that all universities are doing. So as Telio said, I'm extremely passionate of my students, so I had to show a picture when I celebrated a big birthday a few years ago. I won't say how many and how big was the birthday. But let me get to the meat of this talk, which is about what we call analytics. And it all starts with dεδομένα, as we call them in Greek, or if you like, data. And you want to solve an important real problem, in other words, to recommend the right decision, with a goal to bring impact and value. If you're talking about Zara, of course, the value is about increasing revenue, for example. But if you are talking about healthcare, it's about the quality of care. It's about being able to schedule surgeries more efficiently. It is about being able to admit patients in the emergency department faster. So value, and that's why I use this word, should not be viewed only in terms of monetary value. The problem is you use data that you have to make decisions, so you have a whole lot of uncertainty in between. And for that reason, we all build models in between. And therefore, analytics, if you like, I will split them in 3 parts. Using the current data to understand, so what is called descriptive analytics. And let me actually go to the next slide, sorry, to to the, not the next slide, but to a slide here, that's basically saying that you're trying to understand what has been, say, the waiting time of a patient in the emergency department before they are assigned to a particular pod and to basically the staff. And then you want to predict what's going to happen in the future. And this part is what traditionally machine learning algorithms will do. They are going to try to build models and algorithms that are going to make this prediction efficiently. So this part is about predictive analytics. And traditionally, machine learning basically focuses on this part. On the other hand, the operations research community for a long time has actually focused on what's called prescriptive analytics. So they would take as a given what the predictions are, but they will use this information to say, make a prescription. For example, this patient that's admitted to the emergency department, what are the right resources they should be given? What is the right pod? What is the right bed they should be put in? What is the right staff? And what is the right treatments that they should be given? Now, what recently both communities of computer science and of operations research are doing are saying that these two should not be two separate things that should be viewed in isolation. They should be viewed together, because at the end of the day, you are doing these predictions because you're trying to recommend a prescription. You are trying to say, what is the best thing to do? What's the best treatment to give to the patient, for example? And I'm going to use as an example to illustrate all of this, COVID-19, but I tried to give an example before that's not about COVID. It's still on healthcare, but what is very nice about this field is it can apply to so many things. And yes, I use retail and healthcare as examples, but you can think of many, many others where you have data and you're trying to recommend the right prescriptions or the right decisions. Many people, both in the machine learning community and in the OR community, in the medical community, and many, many communities actually, worked on relevant problems regarding COVID-19, whether these were about prediction and understanding, whether those were about prescriptions. In the prediction part was what will be the need for ventilators? What would be the need for oxygen, for example? Or what would be the cases next week? What would be the hospitalizations? What would be the number of deaths in a particular area in Massachusetts? And then on the prescription part, for different areas, what were the right lockdown measures? How should we reopen MIT, which is a part that I got involved in? What should be the right testing allocations? Because tests, we had a shortage of tests, especially in the beginning. What's the right vaccine allocation? How, when we had a shortage of ventilators, how do we actually do that? And then, of course, you know, supply chain was also very much affected by COVID. So again, can you actually predict the lead times in a certain supply chain? And which items should you send how, what transportation means, and where? So these are just some examples, but I'm going to get very concrete. But before I get concrete, I want to give credit to the people in my group that actually worked on the particular project. And we gave a name to our team. We couldn't call it Delphi because some very dear to my heart colleagues had already taken that name. So we decided to call it MIT Cassandra. Because as you know, MIT Cassandra was somebody that was able to do very accurate predictions. And these are the members of my group, and two of them are actually Greek. Yannis Pandidakis, that comes from Chania, and Asteris Tsiourvas, who is from Athens. And since then, 3 of these members have now graduated. And Divya is a professor at NYU. Omar is in the group of McKinsey that's about AI, it's called Quantum Black, and Yannis is now at Amazon. And of course, this is just a picture of the many hours on Zoom that we spent. And so how did this all started? Actually, for me, it started initially thinking that all I was doing was building community with my students when they were locked in their rooms and MIT wouldn't let them go to MIT. But soon enough, it became about helping MIT. And so the MIT Quest for Intelligence, that's kind of like the AI arm at MIT, contacted me. And they basically said, can you help us? Because our goal is to reopen MIT. And can you help us with basically building models? The first group of models that we built was trying to predict at the country, state, county, and even zip code level of cases and deaths. And then we have the reported cases, but we all know that there are people who are asymptomatic. And how can we go from predicting cases to what's called true prevalence? So that was the first part of this effort. The second part of this effort was trying to understand the different interventions that MIT would recommend or governments would recommend, how would basically affect things. So trying to understand that what's called counterfactuals of the different scenarios in terms of mobility, in terms of the cases and the deaths. So what was the effect of the different interventions in terms of cases and deaths? And then the last one, which was about prescription, for example, how should basically Massachusetts, and in particular the Middlesex County where we are in, should basically allocate the different vaccine doses from the different vaccine makers. And also, what's the right trade-off between the right restrictive measures to put in terms of the cases? So this is about the prescription part. So you can see here 3 parts, and you can see the predictive part and the prescriptive part. Soon after we started working with MIT, we also started submitting our results and becoming part of the CDC team, basically, where several teams started building models for prediction and prescription. So it was not just anymore about building community, but it was about a lot of hard work. And I give all the credit to my students and my team for that. So because I want also to use this as an example to talk about analytics, the first thing I want to talk is about descriptive analytics. And what descriptive analytics does, it's basically looking at the data that you have in hand, and it's trying to say, well, what is the data tells us? And a lot of people actually consume themselves with that. So saying, okay, here's your current data. Can you summarize and understand how the system has behaved? So in the case that we are talking about, giving the data on past cases and deaths in different counties, countries, states, and so forth, how have the states and the countries done in the past in terms of cases and deaths? Can we understand that? So this is more about understanding the past. So for example, here's actual data from the Middlesex County, which is where I'm locating here in Massachusetts. This is June and July of 2020. It's a month's worth of observations. And you can see in the column before the last, that basically shows for different dates, the 5-day average of cases. So this data comes from Johns Hopkins. And so, of course, I always tell my students the first thing you want to do when you get data is plot the data before you do fancy stuff, because you're trying to understand if something weird is happening. If something weird happens, it might be something wrong with your data. And before you jump into, building machine learning models and so forth, try to make sure that you're not dealing with issues in your data, that they are not reported appropriately, and so forth. So does it make sense? And that's why talking with practitioners was very important to us in all the efforts that we are doing. So let us calculate summary statistics with the data that I showed you. For example, let's look at the mean. The mean here was saying that the average for the 5-day new cases was 35.2. And then let's try to understand a little bit the variability in this, what I call uncertainty. So in other words, how far are the observations from this mean or average that I just showed you on average? So this is where what's called standard deviation comes in. So you look at how your data is, how far each data is from the mean on average. And here the standard deviation is 5.8. And you can see here in a picture, which shows the mean, and then you can see the distance of each data point and what's the average distance, basically. And then you can look at other metrics, for example, what's called coefficient of variation. You want to see what percentage of the mean is your standard deviation. And that's again another metric that will try to show you how variable things are. A lot of people actually worry about mean. And I always say that, you know what, if I'm in front of the freezer and behind the heater, on average, I'm doing great. But how am I doing in reality? So, okay, now you don't want to stop there. After you understand what the data is telling you, and therefore understand if something is wrong, now you want to consume yourself with predictive analytics. How can you use the data that you have to predict the future? So in my case of COVID, predict future cases, deaths, hospitalizations for the different countries, states. And what data did we use? Well, we used data from Johns Hopkins. By the way, the very nice part about it is that there were a lot of sources of publicly available data. Something that in other collaborations, you know, I work with a hospital, the hospital will give me a lot of their data. If I work with Zara, after lots of legal agreements, I will build a model on their data that they will give me. But what happened here is any one of us could go and access this data basically and build models. And I really like that basically. And there were actually a lot of groups that worked on this. There were groups at MIT, Greek people that we all know, or some of us know, but others like, for example, Kimon Drakopoulos from USC, who worked with the current government in terms of how to do testing at the borders. So we used data on cases and deaths from Johns Hopkins. We used data on social distancing policies. We use mobility data from Google and from SafeGraph. We use demographics data from the US Census Bureau. And then other data, like for example, we used weather data. And later on, we also used data on wastewater because we and other people found that this was a pretty good factor to put in the models. Let's make sure, oops. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me share again. Okay, so what the MIT Quest team called the group that was working with them was MCRS. We didn't use their name, but it was MIT COVID-19 response system. And what we were doing was helping to build the MIT dashboard. And in order to predict cases and deaths, we actually decided to build 4 very different models that I will explain next. So don't worry about reading this slide, because I'm going to explain each model. And as you're going to see, each model had different classes, basically. And that's why we wanted to build 4 separate models. Now, a lot of people during COVID used epidemiology models, which are models that have compartments. Here I'm using as an example of what's called SEIRD, which basically split the population in 5 compartments. The first one is those that are susceptible. The second one, those that are exposed. The third one, those that can infect others. And then either recovered or unfortunately deceased. And of course, the secret here is how do you estimate accurately the parameters, betas and gamma here, that show how an individual will move from one compartment to the next. Now, a lot of groups actually build even more compartments, like, for example, a compartment of those that would be hospitalized, a compartment for those that would be in intensive care units, and so forth. And again, the secret sauce here was, how do you estimate these parameters? Now, what my group did is very early in the pandemic, we actually realized that we started talking about multiple waves. And we realized that maybe the initial model was not quite capturing that. So that's why we decided to build what we called the chain SCIRD model. And as you see, this was basically a sequence of SCIRD models, where basically at a certain point, our model would detect that this is now a new wave, and you have to move to a new compartmental model with different parameters. So the betas and the gammas that I have here were varying over time. And what this did is basically, it made the problem more flexible so that it could capture multiple waves. It made the model more adaptive because the parameters of the model will change over time and will basically capture the change of behavior observed. What was the metric that we used? On data that we actually had not touched. I always say, as you must have heard, that if you torture data enough, they will actually always confess to you. And so this was with data that were put aside. And so what we tried to do, let's say that the Y were actually cases that you were trying to predict. The Y hat was with different features what our model predicted relative what actually happened for the data that we didn't use to train the model. And that's what I will use as mean absolute percentage error, which is the average error between what actually happened and what you are predicting. And so, for example, here is the state of Florida. And when you see a dotted line, actually our model was basically predicting that a new wave had started. And the green is actually the original SIRD model. The orange was what actually happened, and the blue was actually our model. And you can see this here on other states. This is Arizona and California. And the thick line is up until where we use data to train our model. And after the thick green line is what we didn't use any of this data and what our model predicted. And here the blue dotted line is what the original model predicted. And you can see that because there was a new wave, that basically that model was off, versus our model and what actually happened was much closer together. And you can see this for Arizona, and you can see this for California. So that was the first thing. The first thing basically was, and I should tell you from data, actually, my students were able to detect that a new wave had started about 5 to 6 days after the wave had started. The second model has a very, very different philosophy. It comes from the field of reinforcement learning. And what it built is from a fixed batch of data, which is the data that we had, was building an MDP model, a data-driven tractable MDP model. So basically, each of those nodes, if you like, was basically saying which location, that location could be state, it could be county, and which date, basically. And the case growth, say, 7.1% growth. And the arrow would say, if you take a certain action, and by action is how you change mobility of the population in that area, it would say that then the model would say you will need to this node that would say now the cases, because you increase mobility by a certain percentage, this is the action, then what's called reward in this area would say here how the cases will grow. Versus if you, for example, decrease mobility, you go here and you basically, the model would tell you here's how the cases would actually lower. So you can see here you increase mobility and you have an increase in the growth rate of cases by 9.8%. Here you decrease mobility by a certain amount and the model said it would decrease by 7.2% and so on and so forth. And so what this methodology that we built did is it basically tried to learn this MDP. And the problem here is that you can create an MDP that would say, here's the mobility action that I will recommend to each individual. Wonderful, this will be a very accurate model. The problem is you cannot actually solve this model. It's going to be fully intractable. And that's why we said, okay, on the other hand, if you build two large groups of people and you give them certain more actions to do, then it's not going to be that accurate on the other hand, but it's going to be very tractable. So what this methodology tried to do is says, what's the simplest, what's the smallest grouping of individuals and with certain features that would be consistent with the observed dynamics of the different regions at different stages of the pandemic. And then we would use this model to basically predict the daily growth or the weekly growth rate, basically, for the cases. Actually, it turns out that this methodology is far, far more general than just for COVID-19. We actually have written the paper that's currently under review, and we are also using it in a very, very different context currently, which is about how to treat sepsis in the ICU. So nothing to do with COVID, but it turns out that it's very helpful there as well. And that's in collaboration with a doctor from Newton Wellesley Hospital. And so in order to build these groupings that I talked about and create this data-driven MDP, we basically use different features. For example, mobility, ranges of mobility, and weather, for example, temperature, and growth rate of cases, and wastewater, and so on and so forth. So these are different features that would create these groups. But then we try to basically, through an algorithm, find the right level of the grouping where basically the model would be coherent, as we call it, or consistent with the dynamics of the system. So, and that was the secret sauce of the model. And as a result, we were able to say, if you increase mobility by a certain percentage, this will be the increase of cases. If you are in New York, for example, or in this date, and so forth. And what this allowed us also is to talk about what-if scenario. So somebody could use this as a tool and say, oh, if this is how much you increase mobility, then this is what the growth of rate will be, and then use it to make the right decision, the right prescription, if you like, for the right level of mobility. Okay. The third model, so again, you see the first model was an epidemiology type of model. The second model was reinforcement learning. The third model came from deep learning. And this I give credit to my PhD student, Asteris Tsurvas, who had just come from Polytechnion. And he was actually starting his PhD, and he came to me, and it was summer actually, and I told him, he said, how can I help? And I told him, why don't you go to a beach in Greece, have a nice vacation, because trust me, during your PhD, we will keep you plenty busy. So you don't want to start the work before even the PhD starts. You know how you say once, twice, 3 times is the charm? He kept knocking and saying, no, I want to do this. And then he got involved. And since his training was in deep learning, he actually built a BioLSTM model. So this is a bidirectional long and short memory deep learning model, which has a good ability to capture order dependencies in sequences. And then the last model that Yannis Pandidakis, another Greek from Hania, actually built, it was effectively where KNN, where machine learning is meeting time series, because it was saying, let's try to map the current time series of cases to the 2, let's say, or K closest time series from different areas, say in the US. This could be counties, this could be states, and so forth. And find the right weights to combine them. Now, then what we did, you see, these 4 models are very, very different in philosophy. And as a result, they would give different predictions. And then what we did is we looked at the errors of all these models. We included additional features. And then we combined them with an ensembling machine learning model. So we ensemble basically these models. And the idea here is that because they will act differently, some models will overestimate, some models will underestimate. And by combining them, you actually reduce their errors. And you made the final prediction that this is what we submitted to CDC and to MIT. The aggregate MIT Cassandra model was basically the ensembling of all these 4 different models. And that was the final prediction. And just this is an example to show you that sometimes some of the components would not do very well, and some other components would do really well. But by ensembling them, the black part would actually do very, very well, because one model would correct the error of the other model, if you like, in layman terms. And so then what we had to do every week is submit to the dashboard of MIT and submit to the dashboard of CDC. But MIT actually didn't want us to stop there. What they want us to, and this is just showing you again some data to show you Massachusetts and how our different models did. But you know, what you want to really look is the error of the aggregate model, because at the end of the day, this is what mattered. And how, for example, that basically compared with the machine learning model, like, let's say, XGBoost. And we did this for counties, for example, and again, you can see the aggregate versus XGBoost. And we did this for deaths also. And I'm not going to bore you with this. And this is from the submissions to the CDC. MIT Cassandra, and then this is just a comparison of how our model ranked. This is for the summer of 2021. I mean, bottom line here, I don't want to bore you, I just wanted to tell you that the model did pretty well, and I think it was because there were 4 models with very different philosophies, very different advantages that canceled errors, and as a result, the final prediction that was combining all these models did very well. Because when one model did well, the other didn't do so well, and then, you know, the average was pretty good. And then we said, MIT actually told us, we actually would like to understand true prevalence, because the ultimate goal is not just to consider the positive tests of the tested population, because, you know, if you don't have symptoms, the likelihood that you will test it is very low. So what my student Omar basically did is to look at data, serology data that he found for different areas. And then what we had to do is to build a model that said, what's the probability to be infected given you were tested? And how this connects with the probability to be infected when you didn't get tested. And using the serology testing, he actually built a model that basically estimated this alpha, which was basically how infection when you are not tested connects with probability to be infected when you are not tested. And basically using this, we were able to estimate the probability to be infected. And we even, yes, we basically use serology testing to estimate that alpha. But here also we created a plot that said, let's see basically how the true infection will vary for different values of alpha. So this is what this plot is. And for example, that was end of November of 2021, and the active cases were actually 37K, but our model said that it should be more 60,000 what the cases should be in Massachusetts. And using data, we were able to see what's the probability to be tested, because we could see who actually tested relative to the whole population, which was a key parameter in the model. As you can see here, we had to estimate the probability to be tested. And so that was the true prevalence part. And then before I end, I will go to the last part, which was then we use those to basically say, how should vaccines be allocated in Massachusetts, in the different counties, in a fair way? And this is basically prescriptive analytics. What's the right strategy? And here, again, I go to the last part of analytics, which is about deciding, for example, how to distribute different types of vaccines to the different counties in Massachusetts in this case. And okay, this is a mathematical model that maybe has too much notation, and the point is not for you to read that. But I want to tell you two things. The goal of the model, what is called in the language of optimization, the decision variables, is how, in which counties, to allocate which doses for which vaccine maker, for what type of population at each point of time. The metric, the objective function that we try to optimize, we used two actually. One was to minimize the number of cases in expectation. And similarly, we also tested this model for the number of the deaths in expectation. So this was the objective function. And this was, for example, for 2-dose vaccines at that time. But now you can add terms when you have a 3rd dose, when you have a 4th dose, and so forth. The next two constraints was what I haven't highlighted here, which was saying that unfortunately, early on, we didn't have an infinite amount of vaccines. So you had to make sure that you allocated vaccines within the supplies that you had. And then we put fairness constraints that we said each county at every point of time should get at least a minimum of vaccines from all doses and all kinds. And finally, we also had the evolution of the population among the different vaccines and the different doses for the different age groups in the different counties. And showing you in pictures some of the results, what the model said, start by vaccinating the higher prevalence counties, but make sure you basically obey a certain fairness constraint, a minimum number of vaccines for each county. And you prioritize the second dose of vaccines as much as you can. But one interesting thing, because I don't want to bore you, because I know I'm overstating maybe my welcome, I was told to do 30 minutes, is that when we looked at different age groups and we accounted for mortality rate at each age groups and the prevalence of the disease in different counties and the degree of exposure that each basically age group had, we found out that it was not necessarily totally optimal to just vaccinate by age. That yes, you do want to vaccinate the older population, but you also want to vaccinate the people that go out and they might get, certain people who might be more susceptible, basically sick. So you want to vaccinate also those younger people because they are going to protect better the older population, the grandparents and so forth that they would go visit. So on this note, I sort of wanted to summarize a little bit what we did. We basically built a wide range of methods. Some of them are new and actually, especially the MDP model that I described, and has applications in many other areas that we are currently discovering. Those models were complementing each other and they were capturing different dimensions of the pandemic. So the aggregate model that then we built was more stable and more robust. Then a contribution of this work was that our CSIRD model was actually adapting to different waves and the changing pandemic in terms of dynamics. And then we were able to help MIT with looking at different what-if scenario and trying to understand what was the right policy for the students in terms of locking them down versus letting them go in person for classes, because this was very, very important to MIT. And in fact, MIT was among the first institutions that we were teaching and going to the university in person, but with obeying certain measures, basically. And finally, about fair vaccine allocation for the different doses. As a result, my group wrote several papers, several of them have appeared, and the last one, which is on the more general methodology I described, is under review in one of our journals. And I want to close by saying here, I wanted to illustrate analytics and the descriptive part, the predictive part, and the prescriptive part. and how it all needs to come together. Because at the end of the day, you are doing all of this to recommend a certain treatment or action that will create value, basically, whatever value means in the particular application and context. So it's going to mean a different thing for retailers, it's going to mean a different thing for a hospital and for doctors. But what I like is the community of machine learning and the community of OR, that they have come very close together. And that's what I also like, going back to the Schwarzman College of Computing, that doesn't believe that from now on we should operate in silos, but we need to operate in a more horizontal way. And that's why I'm very proud to be part of this effort, and which I know it's going to propagate to other universities, including Greek universities. So for me, the journey continues. I had to show different pictures at different points of time with my students. Thank you for listening to me. And I have to show frappé because that's my favorite drink, as some people here know very, very well. And I'm happy to answer questions, so however you want to structure this discussion. Thank you, guys.
Georgia, thank you very, very much for this fascinating talk. As you were talking there, I was trying to make in my mind associations between what the machine learning framework that you build is doing and what the brain might want to be doing in estimating aspects of sensory stimuli, etc. But I'm going to start the questions. I feel free, the audience. I'm going to ask one question, then I'm going to address the audience. And one question that I mean, I completely agree. I mean, about the lateralization of research, that we have to change the model. A very important part of this, I think, that you mentioned actually in a slide and so on, is the access to the data part. And we, working in healthcare, we find an incredible barrier for forging collaborations with institutions, which has become a real problem and even worse in the last 5 years. And I don't know, what do you think could be done to overcome this on two ends? One, we need to get better data, more standardized data, so we don't have to go, every hospital has their own rules, and then you go to another hospital and, another rule, another sort of data. And two, how close do you think are we convincing the regulatory entities to sort of make sense and open things up in a way, could be de-identified, that would allow people to make real progress?
Right, that's a great point. And actually, I'm the editor-in-chief of one of our major journals. And one of the efforts that I have been doing in the journal is how to get data to the whole community. And so far, we have been able to get retail data more easily to the community, especially when it comes from retailers like Alibaba, JD.com from China. That was much easier. But now I'm saying, well, I want to give nonprofit healthcare data to the community. And, I'm very stubborn because I come from Crete. So I don't take no for an answer. So I'm optimistic. But as you said, get the identified data to the community. But my philosophy is exactly the Schwarzman College philosophy. And that's why, for example, when I work with a hospital, and when they came to me for a legal agreement at MIT, it was not about just a legal agreement for my group. I waited for about a year, actually. So the legal agreement would be such, so anybody, any faculty at MIT could use this data without having to go through a new legal agreement. Now, doing it for the whole community is tougher, but I think that if we somehow de-identify the data, we can make progress. But again, it takes people from Crete. No offense to other people. You have to be stubborn to do that.
Yeah, I can second that. That's completely true. I think we should have this pushback, I think, because the tendency of the regulatory authorities is to restrict this data. And I think they do a real disservice, worsening outcomes even in healthcare, not allowing research to proceed as it should.
Correct.
Anyway, rather than philosophizing on this issue, I will open the questions to the rest of the audience. Feel free to speak up. I don't think you need to raise your hand here because it'd be better to just unmute yourselves and ask the question if you have it.
I have a question. I mean, maybe if there are no other questions so far, I mean, I can.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Maria.
Okay, great. It was a great talk, and I think that all the points that you made about the need for having interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research and creating an educational framework to do this and educate our students, that's really important. So I want also to second that, and I have some more research, more like technical questions on your presentation. I think that the MDP framework that you mentioned is quite general.
Yes,
and
correct.
yeah, and two questions that I had are related to the following aspects. You showed that you have the different features and you cluster the various populations according to these features. And I was wondering how difficult it would be to impose constraints or even some, let's say, laws between these features that essentially express dynamics or interplay. Right. Because, you know, there are different, let's say, physical or psychological or economical laws, you know, that govern the interplay of these features. So I was wondering how easy it is to integrate them, or how difficult it is to integrate such models in the general framework. So that's my first question.
What I did not describe, and that's why I think you have the question, is there's a whole algorithm that tries to show you, okay, you build your first initial clustering. How do you now come to the final one so that you are consistent with a different type of dynamics that you are talked to? So that's a whole algorithm that basically uses this notion that we defined as coherence and minimal representation, where we took each of those sets that we created and we said, okay, if you are in the same set and you take 2 data points and you take the same action, they need to lead you to the same next set. And if you do not, then you're going to have to split. So our algorithm does this splitting, and you can now do this a little bit with incorporating constraints, if you like, by Lagrangeifying them in the objective. I know I'm getting technical here, but yeah, that's what that paper basically is spending itself doing.
Okay.
And it's very technical. That's why I thought, let me not give you all a headache. But that's a great question, Maria.
Okay. All right. And the second is related to the biases. Of course, when we talk about large data in the healthcare, and not only, of course, the data have various biases. For example, different socioeconomic populations, you know, are excluded from the data, and this, of course, affect the policies that you want to pursue later, right? So it is very important, of course, to make sure that, you know, you kind of like try to suppress the biases,
right? That's that's why we had demographic information, so we could see a little bit. You know, we saw also how race played a role. And actually, one of the new projects that I had, which is about waiting time in the emergency room and how to allocate resources, I always felt as a female that when I go to the emergency department, I wait more. And that's what motivated this project for me. I wanted to see whether this is true or not. And it was actually true, especially for the very busy periods. We find out that women, when they arrive and they check themselves in, and then they wait more actually to get allocated to a bed. But once they get allocated to a bed, they actually wait the same amount as basically. So we try to come up with an algorithm that actually would correct that bias. So that's an extremely important, and in my role in the Schwarzman College as Associate Dean for Social and Ethical Responsibility in Computing, very much these issues of bias and fairness are very front and center in my mind for faculty at MIT to do.
Right, Glad to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
That is fascinating, Yoria. So I didn't know this. The women wait longer in the emergency, but not after the bed, at least.
Yes, but they don't wait only in the emergency rooms. In general, they have to wait longer. But let's not open this discussion.
Can of worms here.
Yoria, what do you see as the major challenges of the field in the future? Where do you see the field going? What this has two arms, this question. One is on the application end, right? How can we apply the techniques that are already there? But also maybe you can comment on the theoretical end. What actually is going to come that is actually going to be fundamentally different than what exists already?
So I should say that there are many, many new areas that these type of tools people are discovering that they can apply. And what is extremely important is for all of these tools to be built in a way that they are interpretable and not black box. That's why I kind of liked about this MDP model, because it sort of told you, if you have these characteristics and if you give this action to this group at this particular point of time, this is what is going to happen. And I think in order to get, for example, doctors to do this, this is extremely important. And, you know, because, or the retailers for that matter, I can never get Zara to use anything if to them it looks black box. And you would be surprised, actually, at least I have been surprised to find out that sometimes simple models, yes, maybe they don't work so well with the latest deep learning transformer model that you will build, but they will just be marginally worse, but they will be much more transparent and interpretable. And then you can get more people to use it. So that is one thing that's extremely important to me. And then in terms of the theoretical side, I like how optimization and machine learning are actually now benefiting each other. On one hand, optimization is benefiting machine learning because a lot of these models that are predictive models are very high dimensional and non-convex optimization problems that you need to find out how to solve tractably. And machine learning models are heuristics that work fast and work fairly well. So how do you use optimization to improve? And people have done quite a bit that part. But also the opposite. Machine learning can also help tough optimization problems. And there's this whole area that's called end-to-end learning, that in a way, it actually connects with this picture that I showed you. How do you go from data to decisions? So at the end of the day, you don't want, okay, predict and then separately optimize. You want to use, say, a loss function that will get you all the way to the right prescription. So that, and the communities actually are starting to go in that direction, both in computer science and in optimization. So to me, I love how the two worlds are coming together more closely.
Yes, I completely agree. I think that's fascinating. It sounds really great, this interaction between the operations research and the optimization and the machine learning. And I completely second what you said about the interpretability. In healthcare in particular, it's very different to trust a black box that because you have absolutely no idea how big an error it might make, however infrequently. Okay, so it's the same thing as the Google automatic driver, right? Oh yeah, there was a strange fence and the car crashed. Can you absolutely exclude that? Without interpretability, I think it's very difficult to imagine you can build the confidence to apply these algorithms in rather delicate settings where you really need to operate at the very, very high level. Okay, well, anybody else has a question for Yoria? I want to be respectful of people's time. It's 11 o'clock. You can feel free to leave the talk if you need to.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm of course not at the PhD level, and I'm just starting out in this field of computational neurosciences, right? And I'm working on real-world data that are fascinating. And so some of the phrases that you said in today's talk really stood out to me. Like, for example, the fact that if you torture enough your data, they will actually confess. That was a great line. That was actually a great line.
And other people, I should say, have used that phrase. So yeah, I don't want to take
so
credit.
it was the first time. It was the first time I heard it, and it really resonated. Right. So I wanted to ask whether, excuse me. So whether now, what other mistakes, maybe, and misconceptions do young people that start in these or similar fields have?
So I like to look at the positives, actually, and not the misconceptions. We all have had our share. So, you know, I focus on the future.
Yeah, hopefully I want to avoid them. That's why I ask.
There's no way you can avoid making mistakes. You just need to, it's what I call the law of large numbers. To me, the law of large numbers is, don't worry about the failures that you have today. Just persist. And at the end, it all works out. That is my own story, actually, and I'm a firm believer on that. And, you know, when things don't go well one day, I say tomorrow is another day and things will be better. And actually, they always are. So, so don't worry about the mistakes.
Okay, great.
Worry
Thank
about
you so much.
what you do well, and focus on that.
All right. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you so much.
I think that is great advice. And if I may add one thing, I think the thing I learned the most from is from my mistakes. So track your mistakes down, analyze them, do better next time, or at least figure out what was wrong. You may not have been your fault, but it is good to understand all the mistakes as well as the successes, and then eventually your path will lead you to success, I think. Yanis Smirnakis, I think, has a question. Yanni?
Yeah, that's strange last name we never heard of. No, sorry.
Yes, and then written two different ways. It's true.
Yes.
But we want to see your picture. We want to see you. We don't want to just look at the name.
Camera, yeah.
Camera? There you go.
Okay.
Now
Better.
you can, very much better. Yes, great.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have also one question about biases, because I think they're quite important and quite unpredictable. Is there some systematic way to figure out biases rather than trying to search them out, the biases that you think are likely to exist?
Right, so that's very much problem dependent in my experience, basically. And, you know, I mean, that's why actually part of the logic of building multiple models with very different characteristics was because we felt that one model will sort of correct the other one effectively.
Yes, but what I'm asking is whether it's possible to search for particular biases. And
that's where the context is also going to be right, and that's where you have to look at the data and see what representation do you have. Do you like this representation? Where do you have missing data? If you have missing data, how do you want to fill in the missing data, and so on and so forth. And it also depends on the application, what you want to focus on. That's why I don't think that I can give like a one blanket answer for everything. But definitely, that's a whole area. How do you combine different types of data so that you don't create other issues? It's like all of these are like fields on their own in a way.
I guess it might be too technical. Sorry, did you finish?
Yes, I guess I've got my answer. It's related really to the interpretability of data also. So
it's more the interpretability of the method, and the recommendation of the method is going to tell you basically. Right.
It may be a bit too technical to ask, but it's interesting. Two questions that might go more a little bit on the technical side. One is, do you now, after trying these different strategies that you in the end combine to give you the prediction, have a better intuitive sense of under what conditions each strategy performs better than the others, you know? And yeah, that's one question. And second, if you can comment a little bit on the sepsis project with Newton Wesley Hospital, what happened?
Oh boy, that's another talk. So Actually, when we didn't have a lot of data, having a model helped a lot. So that's where the chain, the CIRD model that I showed was working better. Later on, when we had much more data, that's when the BioLSTM model was working better. And also the MDP model, because it kind of creates counterfactuals.
Yes, I got it.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the sepsis, I guess, a different
Oh,
topic.
yes.
We're not gonna go there.
So yeah,
We'll talk over
we are,
that.
yeah. So that basically what type of treatment, and we are looking at limited resources. For example, ventilators, the observers that are sitting next to the patient, and so forth. And how do you actually allocate those? And how do you track the SOFA score, which was kind of the metric that we are looking? That's like a short summary. And we've actually, right. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say a related question to this, underlying this is, and that you already alluded to, is the quantity of the data you need for each one of the models to succeed.
It's
I think
different.
you answered it already. Sounds like you have different models for different quantities of the data.
Correct.
And this,
Yeah.
I think, is a big advantage, I think, for getting started somewhere, see an effect, move on, convince people to give you more data.
Right.
And so on. All right, great. This was a lot of fun. Are there any other questions? I see actually Kyria Despina is on the on the call, and I want to say hi.
Hi, I want to say hi too. And I also see Marcos, my good friend Marcos.
Hi, Georgia.
Whom I haven't seen.
Yeah, long time.
Yes.
And I should say,
good to see you.
Kyria Despina, you should be proud. I know you are already proud of Georgia, but you should be extra proud.
Good to see you all. Marcos, I follow you guys from Facebook. I know
yeah, I know. I've seen your reactions. I cannot talk too loud because I'm in the lounge. I missed your talk. I was in the airplane. I missed your talk, and I'm now in an overcrowded Lufthansa lounge in Athens because the Aegean lounge is closed and everybody comes to Lufthansa.
Because it's under construction?
They change, they say. I don't know. Until the end of the year, don't expect to be in the lounge of Aegean.
Okay, very good to know.
Yeah. So I didn't have the chance to listen to your talk, but I followed some of the discussion and regarding the safety of AI systems. As you probably know, in the case of autonomous cars that are of interest to me, I mean, people have tried to develop so-called safety filters or guardian angels, as they are called, which provide a framework around the black box, so that if the black box tries to do something that is deemed unsafe, the safety filter will take over and correct it. And since I'm not familiar with AI applications in other domains, my question is whether something similar happens also in other areas that are safety critical.
So I know that there's a debate that about healthcare interpretability versus non-interpretability, exactly for some of the issues of safety that you are talking about. So I'm in discussions with a colleague here at MIT, and who sort of like belongs in the school of thought that models should not be interpretable because you follow them too much and you can make a mistake. And then for not being, but that's a debate that you have two very extreme views, and the truth is yet to be found, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a very quick question, if we have the time, for the biases?
Sure.
So like in my wish list, I guess, and maybe this is a very naive approach, I would think of a set of, let's say, benchmarks that they are, of course, domain dependent, and perhaps regulators and other policy making bodies identify and provide. And then every person who does, let's say, machine learning or data analysis in general tries to first see whether these biases can be detected in their data sets. And then when, for example, the system, and of course, if it identifies them, extract them or try to treat the data appropriately. And then when it provides, let's say, it runs the tools, the optimization, etc., and provides, let's say, some strategies or policies. Also, there are some, let's say, again, benchmarks that try to make sure that, in the emulating these strategies, that these strategies do not actually enhance the, let's say, the various biases, right?
Right.
So ideally, in a very ideal world, I would think that one approach is that. Of course, it's perhaps, of course, the devil is in the detail, but I was wondering if you are aware of such efforts.
So you reminded me of in my new role, I actually work with a philosopher. And basically, some of the things that he's teaching me regarding biases and fairness and so forth is, for example, the question is, do you have biases because you have biases in your data, which is what you guys are talking about? And there we have the example of Amazon and the hiring algorithm they did in 2018, because, they fed it only male data. So, of course, the algorithm, what would it do later? It only tells you to hire white males. No offense to anybody here. But, or is it the process of the algorithm that basically is fair versus not? And, I'm talking to all sorts of agencies and so forth in my role, and they are all telling me that we kind of need to differentiate between the two. And the benchmarks that you're talking about are also very important. So this way you can a little bit start understanding, but just being aware of those two differences.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Very, very good. So I think, we would like to thank Georgia for this fascinating talk and another
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, a timely talk. I think this is a very important area we're going to see more of in the future. The world will change for the next generation. So any young people here that are interested in this area, I'm sure Georgia would love to give you advice.
Definitely.
And
It would be my pleasure.
To make contact by email. Or,
Yanis, are you in Greece or in abroad? I'm talking about Ioannis Fotis, who spoke before.
I'm actually at Heraklion, but I'm not sure. There are some plans that I have to go abroad very, very soon. So hopefully,
you know how they say when the mammoth doesn't go to the mountain, maybe the mountain goes to mammoth. So maybe we'll meet in Heraklion. You never know.
Yeah, well, today, working with people all around the world, especially after COVID, all this, working from afar is
Yes.
so easy. And the tools that we now have, I think, after these 2 years are really fascinating. So,
correct.
I
So
would
COVID
like to see other places.
COVID did a great thing for us because it allows things like this so much more easily than before.
Right.
Great.
Right. But still, I would like to see other places and work in environments that are culturally different and also in organization, and that's all fascinating to me too.
I'm sure you will.
All right, I will pass the back to Jeremy to maybe close and the meeting for us. But thank you again, Georgia, very, very much. It was really great. It was a privilege.
Thank you very much. It was really nice to see everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Stelios, for your facilitation of today's Distinguished Lecture Series. Very much appreciated the time you put into considering these questions and working with Professor Perakis on preparation for this event. Once again, a deep gratitude to Professor Perakis for taking time out of your schedule to prepare such a fascinating presentation. Really accessible as well. I want to remind everyone that we will be holding more of these Distinguished Lecture Series in the future. since all of you did register for this webinar, we will be sending you a link to the YouTube video of this lecture as well, so that you may share with your networks. So with that, we will be in touch after the 1st of 2023 with details about the next distinguished lecturer. And thank you, of course, to the Niarchos Foundation, the Fulbright Foundation for their support, and importantly, the Hellenic Diaspora Academic Association Steering Committee, which I see Maria is on the call. I think we had Panos earlier on the call, and of course, Stelios, for apologies if I'm missing anyone, but for your contributions in planning these events. So everyone have a good day and an enjoyable holiday. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.